Alright guys, can I be perfectly honest with y'all for a minute? I think when it comes to beginner cruisers, you can make the case for a lot of different motorcycles here. I honestly believe that someone could conceivably start on a Harley-Davidson Fat Bob if they were so inclined. Yes, it requires making a deal with the Milwaukee Devil and pledging your eternal soul to the Church of Beer and Butt Rock, but yes, you could make it work. Why? A, because these bikes just aren't that fast, despite whatever Harley Sims down in the comments below are saying. And B, with the lowered seat height, the weight on these bikes isn't too much of a concern for me. Maybe that's my bias showing as a rider with a lot of miles under my belt, but I do get how some people could start on bigger cruisers. Now, I wouldn't recommend running out and getting a VMAX or a Rocket 3 as your first bike, but something with a little bit more power, say like 80-ish horsepower, yeah, you'll probably be okay. I bring this up because the cruiser marketplace, despite being replete with examples of companies trying to vie for the biggest slice of the American bike market that they can possibly grab, doesn't have a ton of bikes that fit our usual criteria. I mean, I started on a 750 that made like 70-ish horsepower, and it wasn't scary thanks to the way it was tuned. I also don't want to give airtime to bikes that I think are genuinely bad motorcycles, like the Suzuki S40. That bike right there can die in a fire. With all that being said, I got a collection of bikes with some of the usual suspects and a few new candidates for those of you who want to choose your first cruiser motorcycle. By the way, these are in no particular order because it's hard to go wrong with any of these, except for one. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Let's start out strong today with the Rebel 1100. Whoa, now wait a second, Spite. I thought you said that this wasn't a beginner bike a while back. Well, this one's a bit on the bleeding edge for me, but if we're going to call the MT-07 a beginner bike, I'm comfortable calling the Rebel 1100 a beginner bike too, with the same caveats. Before we get into it, let's talk about specs. It's packing a 1084cc parallel twin, making 86 horsepower and 72 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, kind of a lot for a beginner bike, but it's really not that much more power than an MT-07, and the extra torque can be managed with a responsible right wrist. If you're an older rider, say someone in their late 20s, and you're out of that young and dumb part of your life with a healthy respect for the machine, you can make it work. Something that does help make the case for the Rebel is the fact that it's got adjustable power modes, traction control, and ABS, and it can be fitted with a dual clutch transmission from the factory. Usually, I don't think that rain mode and street mode are a good alternative for starting on bikes with less power, but normally when people ask me about that, they're trying to start on a middleweight naked bike like a Street Triple and say they're just going to grow into it. The mental gymnastics are a little harder to nail down when you're talking about a purpose-built motorcycle like the Street Triple, but I could see somebody actively learning on the Rebel 1100 in those lower power modes. If you're a little nervous about having that much power on tap, you've also got the Rebel 500, which is basically the same bike but with half the horsepower. It's got essentially the same geometry, so the seating position and handling are going to be very similar, and it'll be a lot harder to yeet yourself into a tree. Now, if you're in the market for a Rebel 1100 as your beginner bike, you'll be sad to know that we have just given away our Rebel 1100. That is correct, it is on its way to its new owner, wherever that owner is. We haven't actually given it away at the time that I'm recording this video. But if you're curious to find out what our new modern classic motorcycle is, you gotta go over to the Discord where you can get an early look at our brand new modern classic motorcycle. This one's a doozy and it's really special motorcycle. You're going to want to check it out. So click that link down below, go to YammieNoob.co and get yourself signed up to join the Discord. You'll get access to all sorts of exclusive live streams, behind the scenes content, early looks at our giveaway bikes, and more. Not to mention the fact that you'll get entered to win these bikes at the same time. So again, if you want to find out what our new giveaway bike is before it goes live on Friday of this week, click that link down below and head over to YammieNoob.co to get yourself signed up to win. Now, number 2 is going to go to one that you can't buy new anymore, the Yamaha Scr950. Why not the Star Bolt? I mean, they are basically the same bike, right? Well, the Scr950 isn't such a blatant Sportster clone. The Bolt is trying so hard to be a Sportster, and it doesn't manage to get any of the charm or feel. It ends up being a completely boring experience. Also, let's face it, the Sportster isn't exactly a closely guarded secret, so not making a bike that could compete with a motorcycle that's been around more or less unchanged for 30 years is just plain sad. However, the Scr950 is what you get when the Sportster and a Bonneville get drunk and have a little hanky-panky in the bathroom at a ZZ Top show. It's a V-twin cruiser with a jacked-up suspension, spoked wheels, and 90-10 street dirt tires. It's like a little weird flat-trackery, scramblery thing, even down to the number plates on the back of the bike. It's packing the same 942cc air-cooled 5-gear V-twin, making 54 horsepower and 59 foot-pounds of torque. Now, the SCR is hardly a competent scrambler, but that's sort of the point. It's meant to feel like a challenge when you take it off-road, and I appreciate the old-school nods on the bike. I just wish they still made it, because for $8,600 new, it's really not that bad a deal. You could basically get any aftermarket part from the Bolt to fit on the Scr950 too, so you've got a decent pile of aftermarket mods to draw on. Number 3 goes to the Indian Scout 60. This is another one where you have to have a little healthy respect for the machine, but if you do, it's totally manageable. The 60 is a modified version of the Scout, featuring a 999cc liquid-cooled V-twin, putting down 78 horsepower and 65 foot-pounds of torque. You don't get the 6th gear, which is a little weird to me. It seems like building a whole new transmission with one gear would cost more than making one lower end and 2 different top ends, but what do I know? Anyways, the Scout 60 is the exact same size as the full-blown Scout, built with the same parts with a few noticeable exceptions. There's a plate missing over the headlight, and the badging on the side of the bike doesn't say Scout, and more of the bike is blacked out, making it a good option for those who don't love the chromed out look of the Scout. You can also pick up the 60 in the bobber trim if you wanted that chopped fender and an even more blacked out look. Personally, I don't like the look of the short fender, and the lowered suspension on the bobber feels a bit funny, but that's just me. By the way, a funny story, I was about to pull the trigger on a Scout 60 as my starter bike back when I wanted to get riding in 2017, but I was denied the special deal at my local Indian dealership over 2 points on my credit score. I wandered down to my Harley dealer and walked out with the Street 750 a few days later. Kinda funny to think what my life would be like if I had gotten that Scout instead. Number 4 is going to a motorcycle that I hate with every fiber of my being. I go to sleep and I have angry dreams akin to Mr. White dancing with Steeler's Wheel playing in the background. If I could collect all these bikes and put them in a rocket and launch them into the sun, I would, but as much as I loathe this motorcycle, I have to admit that it's actually a good beginner cruiser. Kawasaki Vulcan S. Now let's start out with the bad stuff, the engine. It's the Ninja 650/Z650's 649cc parallel twin, making 61 horsepower and 47 foot-pounds of torque. Yes, the torque that it makes is nice, and combined with its low 492 pounds wet, it means that it actually gets up and goes pretty quickly, but it's a very vibrational power plant, and not in the typical cruiser taint massager kind of way. Secondly, the bike feels like a toy. It's built on a budget and sold on a budget, and that means you're left with a lot of plasticky parts, cheap levers and clusters, and an ancient-looking dash even by Kawasaki standards. I also think the bike fell out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down, but looks are a personal thing. Now, for the good, I think the bike is actually one of the best handling on the list, second only to the Rebel 1100. I was expecting it to handle a little bit funny when I rode it, but no, it changes direction very quickly and holds a line super well. Kawasaki also sells their ErgoFit system, which basically means that anyone can fit on the bike, which is nice since it can be tough to find a motorcycle with a short rider who can fit on it and a tall rider at the same time. If you're okay buying a motorcycle that exudes no personality whatsoever, makes a completely boring sound, but it handles well and only costs $7,200 brand new, then this is for you. But seriously, if you want a Vulcan S, please just go get a Rebel. You don't need to live this life. I beg you. Now let's have a bit of a palate cleanser with number 5, the Suzuki M50. The M50 is the less dorky version of the C50, which is a bike so dad to the bone, it actually runs on dad jokes. If you don't know, Suzuki has 2 lines of cruisers, which are basically the same except for some aesthetic changes between the two. The C line is all heritagey and shiny and chrome, and the M50 line is more blacked out and muscly and performance looking, going all the way up to the M109R, which is actually a really beefy muscle cruiser that appeared on our fastest cruisers list. The M50 is packing an 805cc liquid-cooled V-twin, putting down 52 horsepower and 51 foot-pounds of torque. It's a little bit of a bummer that with a liquid-cooled engine they couldn't squeeze a few more ponies out of 800cc's worth of engine, especially when the bike is the heaviest on the list at 593 pounds. It's also not the most thrilling ride on the planet. It gets up and goes relatively quickly, it slows down about as quickly, even with an exhaust exhaust mod, it doesn't make a great sound, but however, it is reliable as a Swiss watch. No matter what you do to an M50, it'll just keep going. I've seen these going for like $1,500 in the secondhand market with over 50,000 miles on them. It's an absolute donkey. I'm laughing at my own jokes here. Oh god, I'm not gonna be able to finish this line. It's an absolute donkey. Okay, I got it this time. It's an absolute... Oh, maybe I don't. The M50 is an absolute donkey, but sometimes you just need a reliable burro to get you to and from. They're a bit expensive for what they are at $8,600. I mean, at that point, you might as well just save a few $100s more and get the Rebel, but if you want a cruiser that's actually built to cruise, the M50 is the bike for you. Okay, now number 6 is going to the elephant in the room, the Harley Sportster. I know you're probably sick of me saying the same old things about the Sportster over and over again, so I'm going to keep this one short. If you're looking for a bike that will actually make your friends jealous and impress people, a Harley has way more curb appeal than any other bike on this list. I know there's a bunch of naysayers down in the comment section right now saying that the Sporty is overpriced and outdated. And you know what? You're right. That's why Harley's making the Sportster S. But in the eyes of a normie, there's no replacement for the genuine article. It's a classic slab of American iron, and who cares if the 883 is only making 50 horsepower? If you wanted to, you could realistically start on a 1200 with no issues. Yeah, it's making like 70 horsepower and 77 foot-pounds of torque, but it's such a lazy engine that you'll really have to work to get yourself into trouble. If I was going to do it all over again and pick another Harley to start on, I'd drop my Eddies on a Roadster in the Performance Orange. It's such a sharp-looking bike, and I still pine for the top-end rattle of the Sportster engine. Now, number 7 today is going to the Triumph Speedmaster. Yeah, a bit of an odd duck here, but I figured if I was including the Sportster 1200, which comes new at around 12 grand, what's another 1100 bucks? The Speedmaster is a cruiser built out of the Bonneville, so it has the old school look and charm and a 1200cc parallel twin putting down 78 horsepower and 76 foot-pounds of torque. It's also worth pointing out that aside from the Harley, the Speedmaster is the best sounding bike on this list in my opinion. Even better than the Rebel 1100, and I love the way that bike sounds. Just don't go by the sound clip that Triumph has on their website. Not sure what's going on over in the land of fish and chips, but they've got a street triple sound on the webpage for the Speedmaster for some reason. Also, if you're not a fan of the chrome, they do have a bobber version, though unlike the Scout and the Scout bobber, there's a massive aesthetic difference between the bobber and the Speedmaster. As far as who should be getting on this bike, power-wise, theoretically anyone comfortable starting on an MT-07 could make the Speedmaster work, but given the price, it's probably better for someone who's a little bit older with some disposable income. Also, you gotta be prepared for all the dads and grandpas at the gas station being like, I had one just like that back in the day. Fact, at the Poison Garden of Alnwick Castle in England, many of the plants are so deadly, they're grown in cages. Goodbye. Well,
my little squid, you've made it to the end of yet another Yammie Noob video. Thank you so much for watching. Just for you, got a little treat for you right over here. Brand new video for you. You can watch it, check it out. There's probably some squidding, some street riding, maybe some track riding. Maybe I'm bending my Ducati off-road. Who knows what's going on in that video? You should probably click on it and find out.